My name is Albert Venable Sr., and I live in Church Point, Louisiana. I'm 75 years of age with a date of birth of November the 9th, 1948. And my friends and close relatives usually calls me Albert, which is a French name for Albert. Was born, raised speaking Cajun French. When I went to school at 6 years old, was unable to speak English, and still not that great in the English language. But it was mostly French, which was changed. When you went to school, you had to speak English. You were punished if you spoke French in school.
Can you speak a few lines of French for us?
Oh, ce matin, c'est un joli temps. C'est moyen fraîche. Et c'est beaucoup beau temps. Today is a very nice day. Kind of cool, but it's a very nice day. I was born on a sharecropper's farm. My parents farmed around the Bristol area. I had small crops, planted corn and potatoes, a lot of vegetables, but it was a very small, quiet upbringing, put it that way. I was raised in pretty much a huge house in the country. It was a 3-bedroom home. It had a kitchen way up in the front, and it was built similar to a T. You'd leave the kitchen, come to the living room, then you'd go a hallway that was pretty much a long hallway with 2 rooms to the left and 1 huge room to the right with a front porch that covered the whole front of the house. And on the back of the house, they also had a porch, which was used quite a bit in the summertime, sitting down and just talking. The houses were probably, I'd say, like a tenth of a mile apart. But everyone around my area where I was raised at were sharecroppers, farmers. Most of them didn't own the property. They were all working at a third of the crops that they made. And it was mostly all cotton and potatoes, corn. But at that time, cotton was the main crop for the farmers back then. Worked with mules, small tractors. My dad had a small tractor and 2 pairs of mules, which he worked in the fields with. They had mostly all the boys and possibly some of the girls. We wouldn't go to school till after the Christmas holidays because we were in the fields saving the crops before the winter come in. And when you were working in the field, you couldn't wait till tomorrow. The bad weather could come up. So we didn't roll in school mostly after the Christmas holidays, which puts you way behind in grade-wise. Everyone was a close-knit family. Neighbors were all not far from where I lived at. And evenings, everybody would gather together, and you'd hear all kind of old stories from the past. And I enjoyed, listening to the history of what happened back in the olden days. My dad was Birchman A. Venable, and my mother was Eula Venable. My dad was, like I said, a farmer, and also was a blacksmith back in the day of the plows and everything. There was no welding machines. I remember when welding machines came out, but mostly he was the neighborhood blacksmith. I remember him working on plows and possibly making 25 cents or 50 cents on the sharpening of the plow. And my mother worked even with my dad in the fields. I remember her leave the fields around 10 in the morning, go home, do her washing, cooking, and around 12 o'clock, She'd make a sign, put a towel or something on the side of the house, and we knew it was lunch was at its finest. My dad was a very meek person. He a hard worker and enjoyed. I remember him making large gardens and giving away just about all the crop he made, to the neighbors and friends that would come by. And my mother was the same way. I think they enjoyed planting stuff just to give it away. I remember one grandmother on my dad's side, and on my mother's side, I had the grandpa and grandma, which when my grandmother died, I was probably, but I was married then, probably somewhere in the 70s. Then my grandpa and grandma on my mother's side, they had died before that. Uh, and like my grandfather was a blacksmith, possibly that's where my dad picked it up from. I'm not sure, but he was also a blacksmith. And my grandmother on my mother's side, one thing I can remember of her was she'd make the best fig cakes you could eat, and or bread. She was a baker. She was old. She'd come spend some time, a few days at my house while everybody was working in the field, and she'd bake cakes and just about anything you could, make. I remember back then you'd buy a watermelon, you'd save the rinds and make preserves with that. Figs. Yeah, everybody grew their own crops to feed their family. You'd go to the store back then and possibly spend the money on coffee, sugar, minor stuff, staple merchandise, but everything else was all grown. You had your milk, you had your eggs, you had your meats, everything. I remember, my parents talking amongst themselves of my great grandfather and all that. The They're mostly all raised around our area, but I've never met them. My dad's dad died in '47. I was born in '48. One thing I can remember on my grandfather's side, the Venable, he had wired the house with electricity. Only place that electricity back then was the towns, and the electricity started going in the rural areas in the countryside, and his house was all wired up to have electricity, and he died before the house really. He never seen electricity in his house. He died a few months before power came to his house. But I remember many homes back then that still had the lanterns, no electricity. And I was born, like I said, in '48.
Did you attend college?
No, I didn't. Most of back then, most of the ones that would go to college were kids of kind of wealthy people, unless there was no grants or anything like that to go to college. And most of them couldn't afford to go to college. I was thinking seriously of going to the Navy till I guess a few days before that. I got my greetings from Uncle Sam and decided to go ahead in the draft and took basic in Fort Polk, Louisiana. Went to Fort Knox, Kentucky in the Armor Division, then went to Germany, spent 18 months in Germany, in Augsburg, Germany, and got my honorable discharge and came back home. My first job would have been working, back then they were called five and dime stores, 5 and 10. It was pretty much like the Walmarts of today. We sold everything. I started after school on Saturdays working as a stock boy, and once school was finished school, I was given a store to manage, and I managed that business for 10 years, went in service in '69, and I left the store to go to the service. When I came back, I called my boss and I told him I was back and see if he had a store for me. At that time, they had 5 stores. So he offered me the store in Mamou, Louisiana, which I left and went work there. And till they closed down when the bigger stores came up. And but the job I stayed the longest, I had different little small jobs in between, very few. Uh, went in the law enforcement, was a patrolman for about a few years, then became assistant chief, and then ran for the office of chief of police and served as chief of police for 28 years. Uh, and in an elected position, served 7 4-year terms till I retired in 2018. But like I said, I had other jobs, but just small jobs. But they would have my main future was that till I retired.
Do you identify as Cajun?
Yes, and proud of it.
What makes someone Cajun?
I think it's the way we were brought up, our ancestors. Many people from here, the ancestors come from Canada, which is also French speaking. And I think my ancestors come from possibly Ireland back then, in that area there. That's what we were taught. And the way we speak and our beliefs, that'd be what makes a Cajun, I think. Our food, our way of life, very simple. When we were going to school, as I mentioned earlier, we couldn't speak English. You weren't allowed to speak French. A lot of times we'd, like the neighborhood kids, we'd play together and we'd speak French among each other, but we had to be kind of not letting anyone hear, because naturally some kids could have told the teacher that we were speaking French on the school grounds, and it was a no-no back then. And then years later, I remember when I think it's an organization called Coderfield that came in, and they were trying to bring back the French language, which was a great thing, but it wasn't considered as being a no-no speaking French. And we were well known, for our foods, our way of cooking, and many people leave other countries and comes here just because of our food that we prepare here. Coming up, I remember making boucheries, which is a butcher, where you'd old friends, family would get together and have a big butchery. They'd slaughter a hog, pig, and had a big meal, and just bringing people together. Back then, if a person, most of them were farmers, if let's say the weather would be bad, a hurricane come and destroy some of the crop, and you had just very few days before you had to put it, save it, sell it, but that was your living. And they'd all meet together. Everybody would come in from the neighborhood and just help out. There was no say, well, how much you pay me? It was one hand helped the other, called back then. And it was all helping with a good heart, just to help people out, and it was great being back then. I think my generation would have been the generation that seen the most changes in a lifetime. I remember as a child, a young boy, they was talking that one day we'd have a phone where you could see the person you're talking to, which today we've seen it, but that was unheard of back then. People don't speak on the phones anymore. They use that phone, text each other. People don't have time. It's like you get off of work and it's time to, eat dinner, and go to bed. I remember neighbors coming in, and that was after working in the field all day long, sun up to sun down, and still have time to visit, sit on the porch, and just reminisce, talk about old things, and because back then nobody knew what went on across the field than anywhere else. We didn't have all the bad news that we have now all over the world, and people were close together, which I love to see, come back in our new generation of our young kids, and just take time to enjoy life, not at a fast pace. Most of the change that I've seen is some is for the best, and the and it's made possibly life easier and more. People live better now. When I was a young kid, we had no air conditioning; it was just a fan, and people has the improvement has been better for the world, I think. And like I said, some for the best, some for the worst. But and I think the change is going to benefit the young people coming up.
What advice do you have for the younger generations interested in preserving Cajun culture?
I would encourage them, as much as I could, to keep up with the way of life of the Cajun life, our, our heritage, and keep this close knit, family wise, with their parents. People now live different lives. Most of them live away from home, and which have with no choice of their own, they have to make a living. But I'd say keep the families close together, and not forget your roots and where you come from.
Do you know any traitiers?
My younger days, my mother she could treat you for just about anything you had. A sunstroke from a bleed. Somebody would cut themselves real bad, and they could treat you and stop the blood. Um, and but the ones that would treat it was for sunstroke. I remember I was a young boy, probably old enough to remember, maybe 6, 7 years old. I had been sick. Uh, hadn't couldn't do anything, just running fever, high fever. Stayed in bed. Back then, the doctors would do house calls. We had a Dr. Keller here in Church Point, was one of our best doctors here. So they called him. He come to the house and check on me, and looked at me and examined me. And he told my parents, he said, he has the measles. That's why I was running fever. So he left, and later on, my grandmother, she was also would treat for just about anything under the sun. She come in, and she looked at me, and she says, he ain't got the measles, he's got the sunstroke. So, and I remember her treating me for the sunstroke. And within, I'd say now, a couple of hours, 2, 3 hours, I was outside playing with the other kids. I'd like people to understand, treating wasn't really a little hocus pocus thing you did. It was really prayers that were said over the wound, the body, or wherever your illness was. But it was all prayers. It wasn't, jumping around the person, and it worked. And I can testify to that. I've seen my mother treating people. One incident I can remember, this lady come in. They had to help her in the home to help her walk. She had arthritis, so they asked my mother. She said, "Do you treat for arthritis?" She said, "Well, I've never did, but," she says, "it's prayer. So whether it works or not, it's not lost." And they carried this lady, helping her walk in the house, sat her down in a chair. My mother treated her, and guess what? She got up from the chair and walked to her car. Whether it was her faith, that believed so much into the prayers or whatever, and it was all silent prayers. So no one knew what the prayers were being said. So, but and this lady got up from the chair, walked to her car, and they left. And she called my mother, and she told her that she was healed. And one thing that I can remember, if you were treated, you couldn't accept money. You couldn't say thank you. It was just, just that way. You couldn't say, well, after they finish treating you, here's $1, $2, whatever. You couldn't charge, and you couldn't say thank you. Why, I don't know. But that was the way it was back then. And today, I think possibly still a few people out here that treats, but they, mostly all have passed away. I remember my mom and dad, and we were 3 or 4 in the family, but I was all the others were all married, and I came in later in life. And I remember my dad and all kneeling down every night saying a rosary. I remember I can see my dad taking a chair and they turn it backwards, and just put their arms on the seat and say the rosary. And that was a nightly affair, and church every Sunday. And I remember when for instance, the things were bad, the crops raining and just hard to harvest the crops. We'd go to church on the Sunday morning. My dad would talk to the priest if it was okay if he could work on the Sunday. So back then they believed in the church, was everything to them. And if the priest gave his blessing, you could go to work. And people said, "You worked Sunday?" "Yeah." "I can't believe you worked in the field on the Sunday," because that was a no. And then the first thing he said, well, we went to talk to the priest, and the priest said it was okay because the crops were point to being lost. And mostly back then, they believed the priest was possibly the most intelligent person in that area, because whatever the priest said, they pretty much went with him because he was educated, and he kind of like kept him in the right direction, I presume. But the people back then relied a lot on the church and the faith in the priest. The first church I ever attended was in Lewisburg, which is between Opelousas and Church Point. It was a small community church. I remember going to catechism. We lived, I guess, about a mile or 2 from the church, but that was every Saturday morning. You'd take off for walking, because you couldn't say, well, Pop, bring me over to the church, because they were mostly working in the field, so they couldn't just leave. So everybody would walk to church, would start walking and meet with one of the friends down the road, kinfolk, and walk all the way to Lewisburg. I remember when I was a young kid or a young boy, one thing would be like funeral homes. People would pass away, and at that time, you wouldn't leave the dead alone from the time they were laid out to the time of the funerals. And I remember when it started, people would close the funeral homes at 9, 10 o'clock, and many of the old folks, they just couldn't believe that they'd close the funeral home at that time, and leave the body alone. It was a tradition that they would never leave them alone until the time of the burial. I remember my grandpa, he was a blacksmith, and also he'd do carpenter work. He was afraid of the dead. So my dad, you couldn't bring him around there, but on the other hand, he'd build coffins, all made by wood, boards or whatever, and he'd build the coffins, and my grandmother would line it with material and make it comfortable, I guess, for the dead. But but you couldn't bring him around the dead, but still he'd build coffins. So he explained that. I don't know. I wouldn't change anything in my life that I worked, raised a good family, a family that's out of this world. And we still a close knit family, which is something that you can't buy. Been married 50, 52, 53 years, and wouldn't trade that for the world. Just wouldn't change anything. I wouldn't. If I start over, I'd say, well, I'd live the same life I did. It wasn't an easy life, a lot of heartaches, but I'd say you have more good things to think about or talk about than the bad.
What is your favorite Cajun dish to prepare?
I'd say probably crawfish etouffee, shrimp, and catfish. Fish. Meat-wise, I love to cook pork. We call it in a brown gravy. Was served with rice, beans, or whatever. Love to cook from scratch. Make my own. I love to experiment, add different things that I'll take like one recipe, take from the other one, and put them together, and it comes out pretty good.
What was your favorite dish to eat as a kid?
Mostly raised on beef meat, pork, and fish. I remember when I was a kid, my mother could cook fish gravy that was kind of not say thick, but not a watery gravy. And to me, that was the best thing you could eat. And I spoke to one elderly gentleman one day, and I told him, I said, we cook fish today, and I said it doesn't. To me, it don't have the taste of back then. And his answer to me, because he says we eat too many good things today that we don't notice how good the fish was back then. But most of the fish we ate were canal caught fresh catfish or garfish, and the fish we buy today are mostly pond raised, which are on feed. So, and that could be one of the explanations why you don't have the same flavor. I remember going to, we had a little campground called Washington, which is kind of a historical town here in our area. And cook up, go and buy fish, cut it up, put it in a pot, and they make a fire outside. Cook your onions, and you make your little sauce. Add the fish inside, and then spread the ashes. Set the pot in the ashes, and cover the pot, iron pot, cast on it, and just put the ashes around it, and just let it simmer till it was cooked. And to me, that was the best flavor you could ever find, and it had other dishes too, but that was one of the best that I can remember.
What is your least favorite Cajun dish?
There's not too many things. But the only thing I don't care for is chicken. I never was much on eating chicken. I'll eat it when we don't have anything else. The only thing that's cooked. But I'm not really particularly famous on eating chicken. Tonight I'm gonna be cooking crawfish etouffee. Crawfish is almost a delicacy here in South Louisiana. It can be used in so many different ways. You can make an etouffee, boiled, or whatever kind of dish you'd want to make. But it's a seasonal crop here in South Louisiana.
Where did you learn how to make this?
Probably many years ago, through listening to different people talk, especially my mother and family members. The wife cooks it, and a weekend thing where the family would get together and cook crawfish, and we'd peel a couple of pounds of crawfish and make a etouffee. Presently, we start off cooking with butter, a stick of butter for 1 pound of crawfish. and just let it melt down. Start on pretty much medium heat, and then you add a little bit of oil, vegetable oil, or any type of oil that you want you to have with you. You keep stirring it till it melts down, and mix your oil and your butter. Once it's pretty much heated and all melted down, you add your onions and you saute them where they get kind of golden brown. And you keep stirring. You don't want them to stick or burn. You want them to come out pretty even color wise. Then you can add your bell pepper or whatever peppers you want. Once you have everything done, in approximately 10 minutes, it should be all pretty much sauteed like you want them. You go by the color. Then once you have it, the texture you want, and you saute, you add a can of tomato sauce, and you add water to it to kind of mix it all together. And you keep cooking it till you get the acid out, but you keep stirring and cooking it down. Keep adding water. You don't want it to get too thick and burn. Just keep adding water. Then you can reduce your heat if you feel it's getting too boiling too strong. You kind of play with your stove, but you just keep boiling it down till the tomatoes are pretty much cooked. And you're looking about 15 minutes or better. Okay, once it starts thickening up, you can add a little sugar in it. It helps you make you a better gravy. Not too much. You don't want it sweet. Just a couple of tablespoons of sugar. And you just keep stirring it in. And add some more water. You don't want it to get you don't want it to stick to the pot or burn. You just keep stirring it. Add your water as you need it. And once it's kind of color you want, you add a can of golden mushroom soup. And what it does, it thickens your gravy, and it also gives you a good flavor to it. And you keep stirring it in. And you keep it boiling for probably about 10 minutes. And just keep adding water. You don't want it too thick, and kind of, you look at the texture that you want. You drop your heat down, and you add your crawfish, because most of your crawfish that you buy, it's already cooked. So you're just really adding it to the dish, and you just add it in there, and you drop your heat. Just let it simmer. About 30 minutes, you let it cook. You can pretty much see the texture there. As you're looking at, it's a little thin, kind of watery. You don't want it too watery, because it's going to be served on rice. And if it's kind of option if you want to use it. I usually add half a cup or whatever of green onions, fresh green onion tops. Cook them and drop it on the top. And that's the way you make crawfish etouffee.